Howdy, Richard.
Hello, Matt. Here we are. Here we are. We're going to meet, and we're going to have the second of our little discussions about something that finally arrived in. Look, I'm already making notes.
Yeah. You've got the book.
Look, it's a
Yes.
serious bit of. This could hold the back door open. This is fantastic.
I haven't got a copy yet, so I'm very jealous. And for those that are just listening to the audio, Richard has a copy of our book in his hand, which I'm very jealous about. But very good.
But because it's in America, and lots of our friends in America are doing it, we're getting lots of lovely responses, which is really terrific. Great book, love the book, reading the book. In fact, it was really good. Somebody said, can you do a flip chart thing? Can you do a flip chart learning thing? So there you go. We'll have to think about that.
Interesting idea. Yeah.
So we got some ideas, but we need to get a bit more. So we had talked a little while ago about the introduction, just sort of introducing people to the ideas. And now you're thinking you've got half a dozen sort of important points that we want to bring out that they did it. So how about you take the lead on that, and I'll jump in with you, because I think the really, really simple and fundamental ideas that our book is bringing forward, but are fundamental ideas that we need to engage with as the 21st century therapist.
Yeah, that's right. So I thought, we've got to lay a foundation here before we've got plenty of time to jump into a whole lot of detail in the future. But just once again, and we've sort of said this in different contexts, but let's just sort of lay it out very clearly now. And I've got 5 sort of points here. So let me bounce these off you.
Okay.
So the first one is grabbing bits of knowledge, neuroscience, genetics, medicine. It's not much good to you without a broad contextual understanding of the whole person, the person in context, so to speak. Every bit of detail belongs in context.
It's such an important thing, Matt. This idea of I can get snippets. And that will do. Now, it's sort of I can get give me the brief version. Let's go back to school. When what we did with the Shakespeare, we used to get those little booklets you could get, which was a sort of a primer. And so you didn't have to read the thing; you just had to learn the stuff. Now that worked if all you wanted to do was satisfy, I don't know, some exam board or some external thing that didn't matter. But when we're working with clients, it's really important. And I was really aware of this issue in relation to my neuroscience when I started to get mentored by Ernest Rossi, because I would know, there was stuff I knew. Fantastic. And then there was stuff I just didn't know. And then I started hanging around with Lou Cozzolino and Dan Siegel and things. And there were gaps all over the place. And that's why I did the brain and mind sciences degree, because to fill in the gaps and get the whole story, even though it was a very technical degree, and I kept putting my hand up and saying, so how does that relate to a human being? But even still, and it put together, which is what we've tried to capture in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tantalizing, isn't it? And we get a lot of this from pop psychology, where they throw out sort of little bits of very interesting bits of information which satisfy a sense of curiosity, but often in our work as psychotherapists, those little bits of information are rather decontextualized. So they're not within the context, the broader context of the person in front of you, the dynamics of psychotherapy. So first point.
De Bono he wrote a book called Simplicity.
Yes, I've got that.
And to be simple, and it's a fabulous book. I mean, some pages are empty, so it's really good white cover. But he was saying simplicity is not simplistic. They're two different things. And simplistic is where you produce only enough information just to satisfy a need. And in fact, that's where we get silly things where you use silly logic, like those deterministic logics. Everybody in World War II wore pants, so people who wear pants, conduct war. I mean, it's just sort of these strange sort of straw man arguments and bits and pieces. Whereas getting things simplified, not reduced, not made simplistic, but simplified so that they can be understanding. So meaning language that is accessible, meaning shorter sentences, meaning maybe using bullet points instead of writing complicated areas, meaning maybe using images and diagrams. This type of process and approach, and particularly what you've just saying, here's the whole being. Let's start with that. And now we'll start looking at the other elements.
Yeah. So point number 2, any one bit of information is almost never the key or the silver bullet to an issue. Don't get too excited about any single revelation about one part of biology or psychology. It's just a piece of the picture. And in 5 years' time, there's a 50-50 chance that it still may be true.
Oh, yeah. Lou Cozolino used to say that in his speeches. He said, I've been doing neuroscience for 20 or 30 years. And pretty much I remember that after about 10 or 15 years, 50% of it was wrong. And so he said, well, now I'm speaking now, I don't know which 50% is going to be wrong, although I think we're getting more accurate as we go along, we're learning. But it's interesting, this silver bullet, this give me the one thing. Now, this is really this linear thinking, isn't it?
It is. We want to know like you said, give me the dot points of, how to do X, Y, and Z, just so that we can, fix a particular psychopathology or circumstance, and things just don't work that way.
Well, they don't work in an understandable way. It's a bit like I suppose something to do with the plumbing, and somebody says, well, just put a spanner on it and turn it half a notch, and you go, oh, great, that's the answer. Now, of course, that's just the dumb guy's method, because the guy who was explaining it to me, this is something I did the other day. The guy was explaining it to me. He didn't go to all the trouble. I then went and Googled it and found out. I said, oh, it's to do with the screws. It's to do with the stuff. It's to do with there's water does something. It hammers, which can dislodge things and move things around, causing leaks. And that leak can then do this and blah, 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 blah. I mean, there was a whole complexity of stuff and complexity of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it looked terrific. I got a spanner, fixed it, and I'm the hero. But I don't know. That doing the spanner didn't tell me anything about how to not have it happen again.
No, and without that background knowledge, the next time you come across the same problem with your pipe, what will your answer be? It'll be exactly that. Turn it, whatever, half a notch.
And what happens if it's not that one? If it's a totally, and I turn it, the thing, and I over tighten it, and I've done those sorts of things where I've done the same thing I did before, unwitting to witless to the fact that it's a totally different problem.
Now and of course it's easy, if I, as I say, it's one bit of information is almost never the key or the silver bullet, and people say, well, yes, of course, but we do have a psychological propensity to want that to happen. We have a propensity to want to grab onto that one new fantastic sounding key piece of information that it would be the silver bullet.
Quick one. And I think, because there's two things here that are just occurring to me. One is exactly that we want the key, we want the thing that will fix it, and of course we want the new thing. Just as you were saying, this is what just triggered me. We want the new thing because, of course, that one thing doesn't work. It doesn't work because the system it has an effect, but it doesn't necessarily work in all cases. So therefore, we're always wanting a new thing to be the single bullet. That's why people keep marketing on that. But because it's juxtaposed against when you think in systems, when you think in the nature of the way that if you change the initial conditions, if you alter the organizing rules, you can make a small single change, which can create a cascading set of events that can have a very large effect. So I don't want to confuse the two things. One is just trying to get a magic wand cause and effect, magic, as different from affecting the system and allowing the system to reorganize itself in an effective way.
Absolutely. And this isn't, we're not just sort of, doing the theorizing here and it's all just fairly abstract. This is very practical. If we really think about this, this is a very practical mindset to get into when it comes to dealing with people.
And yes, and looking at people, like, for example, I just thinking of a quick case, and I think I wrote it in the book, I can't remember. but obviously one of the best things, we all know this, one of the best things for depression and anxiety too, but particularly these affective disorders, but depression certainly, is to go for a walk, is to activate, because this, and as we talk about in the book, it activates BDNF, it takes away cortisol, you learn about all those sorts of elements, but to go for a walk. Now, you could say, to have 20 clients there and say, well, what you need to do is you need to do a 20-minute walk morning and the afternoon. And some of them will just do that, and that'll be terrific, and everyone will be happy. But a lot of them won't. And I had this guy, and he wasn't interested in anything. He was a pretty narky, snarky old businessy fella, and he didn't like people. He didn't like anything. There were a lot of reasons why he was depressed. But I wanted to get him walking because he wasn't. He was sitting all the time doing that. So I said to him, you know what I noticed the other day in my neighborhood, and because I go for, this walk, we talk about walking, talking things, and I go for a walk, and letterboxes, that some people personalize their letterboxes, and gee whiz, you can see how stupid they are. I mean, fancy personalizing your letterbox. What about you? You got any of those letterboxes in your area? And he said, oh, I don't know. Grumbled away. Came back the next week and he said, I went to have a look for those letterboxes you talked about. I just thought, yeah, that's right. I found one a couple of blocks away. Oh, I don't know what kind of idiot that bloke is, trying to, what's he trying to do? He's probably some, and, he's very critical and all the rest of it. And all I was doing was sitting there. You walked 2 blocks.
You went for a walk. Yeah.
Fantastic. And 2 blocks back. Gotcha. So there's this sense of interplay that we can do, that the magic bullet, it's a message, it's a possibility, it's something that then needs to be engaged with and experimented with and improvised with.
Yeah, I like that. It's a possibility. Point number 3, the science we consider is only materialistic, deterministic, and reductionist if you believe it is. The left hemisphere loves to break things down into mechanistic, materialistic bits. And these bits, like cogs in a machine, make up and determine what the machine is. However, we're nothing like machines. We're complex systems, parts of which are intangible. And I'm thinking about, the mind and the spirit, for example. So this idea that, you guys are talking about science and that's reductionistic, that's materialistic, that's deterministic. I don't want anything to do with that. That's got nothing to do with psychotherapy. Well, it is if you believe it is, but we don't believe it is.
Well, and we've got good reason. It's good reason why people do believe it, because that's what we're taught. That's the educational process. Learn how this works, reduce it down, find the elements, be as objective. And when you get to university, be totally objective, get out all the outliers, get out all the confounding elements. And I understand it when they're trying to get a clear answer. But the result that we've found, as we've been re-examining the research over the past decade, is that a lot of the answers are not right for human beings. They're right for the very restricted, reduced, limited mechanistic process. And so, but it's a bit like, and we talk about this in music, it's a bit like when we learned piano. We learned the scales, very mechanistic, very reductionistic, very much. But let's even look at other things in the folklore. What was the one with the kung fu things? You know, wax on, wax off.
Oh yes.
But again, to learn, we need to make things simple and straightforward and easy. But we forgot to then let go, and then it became reductionistic and limited and restrained.
Well, I think, as Ian McGilchrist points out, what happens is, so we perceive the whole with our right hemisphere, and then we go across to the left hemisphere to break it down into parts so we can, understand the parts. But then that understanding comes back across to the right hemisphere, which appreciates the whole. Yeah. And it's more than a reassembling of the parts. It's a greater depth of knowledge of the whole. So,
well, yeah, and Prigogine, who was huge in the whole complexity theory stuff. I mean, he said the point of differentiating, and he was doing this from a purely mathematical perspective, but the point of differentiating into the elements, because he was assuming that you understood that the emergent property, the emergent whole that you came, was not reflective. You couldn't see the elements in the whole, and you couldn't see the whole in the elements, the completed part in the elements. He said, but you differentiate the elements in order to explore the possibilities that are not visible while they are part of the emergent property. And so we get to this word possible again. So Francine Shapiro, who noticed that her eyes moved left and right and had a rapid eye movement, and that helped her with the work she was doing with trauma. That's just a natural process. She noticed it. It's a part of the whole. It's a part of it. She noticed it. She explored it. She expanded it. She enriched it, which is terrific. And of course, what we're saying is that's great. Now put it back into the system.
Yeah.
Don't take out the spark plug and clean it and fix it all up, but then leave it out of the car. Put it back in the engine.
Yeah. And I think it's a truism that we are more than the sum of our parts, right?
Well, it is evident. I mean, just simply got to look at ourselves. I mean, if you're watching on the video, can you look at us and see a liver? No. And if there was a liver on a table, could you look at a liver and see the mammal or the entity or the living being that comes from it? And we're not supposed to. So the elements come together, they interact, they intertwine, and they produce. I mean, you can't see the genotype, the genotype as we look at us, but what we are, our visible thing, has been given a different word, which is the phenotype. So we use a different word to describe what emerges out of the system.
Yeah. Point number 4, associations and correlations are more important than the decontextualized bits. We are a complexity of relationships rather than a mosaic of bits. Now, again, focusing more on the relationship between the parts, and as you talk about the emergent qualities that come out of that, is far more important than what I'm calling a mosaic of bits.
Yeah, if you look at people at a crosswalk, the zebra crossing for the various countries that you're in, but you get a whole bunch of people, and I know there's that particular intersection in Japan, which is like 5 ways or something, and there's a mass of people. And there's so many different ways you can view that experience. The whole thing of the movement, the shift of things coming down to the individuals, going down to the legs and to the feet. There's all kinds of different ways you can find the pieces, but it's the associations, the correlations, the connections. There's groups, where people move, how they move, why they move, and most of it's intuitive. I mean, we have no direction, so the walking across the road is actually a perfect example of a complex self-organizing system. But this thing, association and correlation, they're interesting words too, aren't they, Matt?
We might not be able to discern a direct causal relationship, but we might be able to see a correlation. And
things that happen sort of at the same time, but not necessarily directly because of each other.
Exactly. Yes.
And
Yes.
associations are things that become engaged, but not directly as a collective thing, but they are
That's
pulled
right.
into the system.
So
And
yeah, again, this is thinking more along complex systems thinking rather than sort of linear causal thinking. So,
yeah, I mean, a lot of this is what in the chapter on emotions we talk about this, that the nature of the emotional feeling that we're having can go everything from the non-conscious type of uh, self-organized emotional state that hasn't yet emerged into our consciousness, which causes our bodies to move and respond and react. But it's only when there's an association and an interaction with our autobiographical memory that we begin to have a sense of emotion. And this is what Ledoux and Brown are talking about, that emotions have to happen to someone. And that someone is that emergent property out of the interactions of autobiographical memory and also biological memory.
yeah, yeah. And to sort of bring it to a really sort of stark illustration, if you were dead, we would still see an assembly of bits. We could see, your brain cells and all the cellular bits that make up your body.
Yeah.
But the dead body is vastly different, isn't it, to an animated live body where everything is communicating and
Yep.
interacting and relating.
Yeah, and when we're talking about abstract elements and about things, certainly that life, that ability to reproduce and continue. Yeah.
Now, if I look at your live body and I can say you're a body. If I look at your dead body, you're still a body, but there's something vastly
There's
different.
something vastly different. So, and this is true. The systems within within us, and there are many, and we talk about them in the book. We talk about the autonomous brains. I mean, certainly we have the skull brain, which is very autonomous and makes its own decisions. But we've got an autonomous sort of neural network around the heart. We've got this autonomous, meaning that it can make decisions about itself and other parts of the body independently. We have that, of course, in the enteric brain, in the gut, and we know there's enormous connections to the brain and various things there. And also one that's not talked about much, which I hope is a bit of a revelation, is in the skin. So yeah, this thing of where connections and relationships and interrelationships are by causal, by direct, by association, and then some things that when they both happen at the same time create certain elements which are different than this correlated sort of process. So correlations aren't to be ignored, but they are to be, their differences and their separateness needs to be recognized and appreciated.
And just coming to the last point here, the science needs to be broadly understood and absorbed in a way that it provides a type of intuitive background in our minds, as opposed to constructing specific therapy steps based on discrete bits of scientific evidence. I've just sort of made up this kind of phrase, intuitive background in our minds. And what I mean is, we have a broad understanding of a lot of different disciplines and sciences that kind of give us that big, broad overview.
Yeah, and it's each of these bits of knowledge and information, and particularly when they contextualize. I mean, certainly this we can see with clients where we might be working on something, we might be working on something that is very productive, and they're just not getting it. And then suddenly something twigs, something else in the system other than just the magic bullet, hey, here, do this. And it's actually something else that tweaks them. But then all these other things start to come into some kind of play. And we actually improvise life. Nobody gets up in the morning, even though they might set up plans and projections for the day. but the pressures that are put on the therapeutic experience to produce certain effects at certain times because of certain actions is just not true to life.
So what we're proposing here is neither, a quick nor easy thing to do. And that's to, have an appreciation for, a broad array of, scientific findings about us, about the human condition.
Because there's a lot to it. But equally, we're not saying learn everything before you can do anything.
No.
It reminds me of the story of John Lennon and Paul McCartney,
right.
And they could play a couple of chords, and the essence of it was their talent and their capacity and their gifts were already there. They were in place, their natural capacities. Anyway, they heard about this guy who knew this other chord, this other guitar chord. Is it really? And Paul McCartney tells the story how, they had to get in the bus and walk over, and they eventually found this guy and said, show us the chord. And I can't actually remember the story off the top of my head whether it was G. I know they talked about B flat, but it was something like really fundamental. I'm thinking, seriously. Then they went back, and then they were able to put together, and then they were able to write a song like She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. which they weren't able to write when they didn't have that little extra bit of knowledge. And then they go along, and I mean, one of the things which is extraordinary with Paul McCartney is he figured out that you could play an A flat chord in a song in the key of C, and that just made a really different thing. And he thought, that sounds nice. It changed music.
Yeah.
It changed music.
It might have changed pop music, but classical composers had known that for a long time before the Beatles. So
that's right. I forgot you're clever on these things. But anyway, he figured it out. And but by adding that, but there's an example. Paul Simon talks about the classical writers, talks about going back to things. I was playing this thing by Mozart the other day, and then boom, out comes whatever, Bridge Over Troubled Water or something. But this essence of the excitement of learning each piece. But what I hear you saying quite clearly as you put through these points, that these elements are fantastic, but if you can contextualize them at the same time, and maintain this sense of that you're looking at it within the context of whatever it is, and of course we're talking about the biopsychosocial sort of understanding of the self meaning the body, then it starts to be additional pieces in the puzzle. What we don't want is people. And what's happened is that there's like 50 jigsaw puzzles in the shelf, and everybody can only grab one. And if they grab two, they're two totally separate puzzles. And so they're sitting there with a piece, and they go, does that go in that puzzle? Or does that go in that puzzle? And what we're saying is, no, it's all the one puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've made a mistake in dividing them up and separating them, and saying that if you do this puzzle, you don't need to understand anything about any of the others.
Yeah. And, we already have an appreciation for the broad context, right? This is
we're alive, we're us. Yeah.
This is our experience of being human and experiencing other humans. We have the context. What we need to do is assimilate now what the extra things that we're learning into this context, which we're already aware of.
And that's why in the book, and maybe next time we'll talk about how you and I and others work with this clinically, but right through the book there's just this constant smattering of we actually box them off into a separate thing of clinical notes. This is what you can do with the knowledge, or this is how the knowledge enhances what you do. Because that's what it's all about. That's why we call it the practitioner's guide.
And when you come across the what's the practical application, it's like, oh, that sort of information about autoimmune encephalitis, that sounded really complex, but the little box that we have at the end, you'll probably say, oh, well, that's easy. Yeah, you just got to
It
look out for these few
makes
things.
sense. Yeah, makes sense. And in fact, if you want to grab the chapter, read the clinical notes first, and then go backwards. That's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine too.
Yeah.
But now we're getting to wind up, I think.
Yeah.
Matt and Susie, my lovely wife, she was reading my book yesterday. Isn't she gorgeous? And there's just a quote that she said, yeah, I like this. And if we've got a second, I'll just read this, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's on page 14. So we're early days of the book. And it said, an understanding of the science does not necessarily dictate a single intervention. Far from it. It informs the therapeutic process, enabling the most impactful and effective therapy to emerge from a particular therapist's reservoir of techniques and methods, or even the co-creation of a process that is uniquely attuned to the client.
Beautiful.
And that's the purpose of this book.
Yeah.
And all this fascinating knowledge that I know some people go, oh, I don't have to know about that. And maybe you don't. But by golly, it's interesting.
It is. It is. It is a very interesting journey that we're all on as psychotherapists and in the mental health world. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. And yeah, Richard, we'll continue to talk about elements of the book and break it down for people. But until next time, we'll catch you then.
Bye for now.